All right, all right, all right. What did Joey Ramone say? Hey ho, let's go. This is Christopher. And Colin is not with us today because he's in Morocco doing something legendary. Now, at the top of the show, we got a great show, an incredible guest, a guy I literally have fallen in love with, and I'm having a not-so-secret bromance with a guy named Christian Anscheutz. But before we get to Christian, a couple things off the top. Number one, we'd like to ask you to become what you might think of as a podcast legend. And specifically what we want you to do is it's become really clear that a lot of people have never even tried a podcast. So as a podcast listener, we would like you to take two people that you love or like in your life and introduce them to one of your favorite podcasts. Ideally Legends and Losers, but hey, introduce them to any kind of a podcast. We think that podcasts are amazing. And, we're just discovering more and more about this new world. I was a podcast fan long before we started Legends and Losers. And since starting Legends and Losers, I've gotten more and more steeped in it. And I wanted to share a couple of data points with you from Edison Research. In 2016, only 21% of Americans aged 12 or older said they'd listened to a podcast that month. And that's up from 12 in 2013. But still, only 21% of Americans. And it turns out, according to the same research group, Edison, that as of Q4 2015, only 2% of all audio listening was podcasts compared to 54% was AM and FM radio. No disrespect, but who the fuck's listening to AM and FM radio anymore? It boggles my mind. And I've been thinking about, okay, so podcasting's growing, which is fantastic, but it could be growing a lot faster. And I think part of the problem, frankly, is Apple. The iTunes software kind of sucks, and it's hard for new people to even find podcasts on the drop downs, never mind look for podcasts they might like. And so kind of wish Apple was doing more of what a category king should do, which is expand and evangelize the category, because it can be very hard for people to find podcasts, subscribe to them, and write reviews on iTunes. Anyway, to that end, you'll be happy to know you can also find us on Stitcher, which is a great independent podcast platform, as well as YouTube. All of our shows from the beginning, even though we haven't really talked much about it, are audio and video. And so if you're watching, hello, nice to see you. And you can find all of our back episodes on YouTube, as well as our episodes going forward. If you step back and think about podcasting and really what's going on the interweb globally right now, we're at a pretty amazing time in history, because you can find an expert on virtually any topic you want, from boat building to category design and everything in between, who's probably sharing her knowledge on a podcast. And then if you expand out from that, we have some incredible things happening in education. One in particular I'll highlight, our friend Professor Tina Selig of Stanford. She chairs this thing called the Entrepreneurial Thought Leaders Series podcast, and they bring in some of the most forward-leaning minds in Silicon Valley, and they share all that content for free. And you may be aware that a lot of the major universities, Stanford, Harvard, and many others around the world, are starting to share a lot of their class content for free on the internet in one form or another. And so today you can imagine getting the equivalent of an MBA or a PhD or an IUD or a DOG or any kind of degree you can think of. You can gain much of that knowledge just listening to podcasts if you don't really need the degree. The other thing I'll just highlight is there are over 2,400 TED Talks. I don't know how many TEDx talks, but probably a lot more than that. And of course, my favorite is by my dear friend and co-host Colin Vincent. You can check out his TED Talk called "The Rise of the Equity Economy." Now, I'll share with you another mind-blowing fact about podcasts. A couple of months ago, Joe Rogan, on his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, announced that he has over 90 million downloads a month. To put that into perspective, The Big Bang Theory, which is the #1 show on TV last year, according to TV by the Numbers, had just under 20 million views per episode. So 20 million for Big Bang and 90 million downloads a month for Joe. And I think Joe probably averages 3 or 4 shows a week. And so, it's a pretty extraordinary shift, a shift to podcasting. And we think it's our job as people who love podcasts to bring more people into the fold. So we ask you to be a podcast legend and introduce at least 2 people you know and love to podcasting and how to get them set up, etc. Now, another thing we wanted to touch on before we get to Christian is not long ago we had one of the first enterprise software IPOs in a long time. A company called MuleSoft went public. And as of time of this taping, they're at about a $2.4 billion market cap. So congratulations to them. The other thing of interest about this IPO is they were founded in 2016. And for those of you who are Play Bigger readers, you might remember the part of the book where we talk about the IPO 6-10 law, the sweet spot of 6 to 10 years old, that the companies in tech that create all the long-term enduring value are 6 to 10 years old when they go public. And so because they were founded in 2006, MuleSoft was very successful in hitting that IPO sweet spot. And that, based on our historical research, suggests that they will have a good shot at creating long-term enduring value. That said, that's on the positive side. On the negative side, what I was really disappointed to see was I really believe that an IPO is a category design, category shaping event. It's an opportunity to define your category in the market because you're essentially educating investors as well as the broad world who are going to be paying attention to you as to the importance of your category. And as we know, the number one driver of stock price is investors' perception of the size and growth rate of the category. And then next to that is their perception of your ability to become the category king, your category kingness, if you will. And then the third one is the way they look at your metrics and numbers in the context of the size and growth rate of the category and your ability to become the category king. So unfortunately, on all of those fronts, using the IPO as a category defining event, MuleSoft kind of gets an F. They did price above the range. They have a great market cap and deserve a lot of praise for that. However, you saw headlines like in Seeking Alpha, MuleSoft, a great debut for this, quote, donkey replacement business. I know that that's part of their name and all that, but positioning themselves as a donkey replacement business, that's not very strategic. And because they didn't use their IPO to evangelize their category or essentially to position themselves and explain to the world what problem they solve and why that problem matters, in Fortune magazine, you have things like newly public MuleSoft wants to become the Salesforce of software integration. So they're using what another company does to define their space. What the fuck does Salesforce of software integration mean? And sort of the ultimate example of shitty category design, again in Fortune, is a headline that says, business software firm MuleSoft prices IPO above range. And you're doing a shitty job at category design when the smart folks at Fortune don't know what to call you. So they just say, fuck it. And they call you a business software firm. So they left a lot of potential on the table with their IPO that unfortunately they'll never be able to get back as a category design event. All right. With that, let's get on with our guest today. I had an unbelievable conversation with an executive and an entrepreneur and a former Marine captain named Christian Anscheutz. And here's what I love about both entrepreneurs and our military, law enforcement, and fire service professionals. If you think about it, entrepreneurs and innovators build our country, and law enforcement, fire protection, and the military protect our country. And those are 2 incredibly important things, and I have a tremendous admiration for people who do both. And in this case, Christian Anschuetz, our guest, is both of those things. He's an entrepreneur, an innovator, as well as a former member of our military. So currently today, he's the Chief Digital Officer of UL. UL, as you may know, you may see you may remember their sign or their sign of approval on a lot of devices and consumer products. UL is a 120-year-old company. They call themselves an American Safety and Consulting and Certification Company in Northbrook, Illinois. And their full name is Underwriters Laboratories. And they call themselves one of the world's most leading providers of product safety and certification and testing services, performing more than 90,000 product evaluations of one sort or another a year. And then the products that make it through their stringent tests are registered and bear the UL mark, which is what you see on the side of some of the products you buy. And that is a trusted symbol for consumers. and nearly 22 billion products from 72,000 manufacturers a year bear the coveted UL mark. At UL, Christian is responsible for their digital strategy as Chief Digital Officer. He reports to their CEO. He also is responsible for their digital products and their internal technology. He's a former entrepreneur. He's a retired captain in the U.S. Marine Corps, and he's the founder of a legendary and fascinating nonprofit called Project Relo. And Project Relo it's a nonprofit that connects veterans with executives to create new opportunities, and executives get to experience what a military operation is like if they participate in a Project Relo event. And they get to gain a deep appreciation for the experience and skills and commitment that former military vets or former military now vets who are out in the workforce can bring to a company. And just as a side note, there are over 200,000 U.S. service members who return to civilian life every year. And so Christian's making a huge difference in that with his co-founders and the folks at Project Relo. And Christian's also a dad. So without any further, here's my conversation with Christian Anscheutz.
People join for a lot of different reasons. One thing I would tell you that seems to be the majority of why people join, as opposed to, the things you may hear, like, oh, and I hate hearing this. I absolutely hate hearing the thought that, oh, well, you had to join the military because you didn't have any other options. Well, that's just crap. It's just utterly so untrue for most of our men and women. It's like in some sort of like old model or something like that, where they thought that almost like only the dregs would join the military. That's just flat out incorrect. Most of our men and women join the military because they want to serve something bigger than themselves. And in this case, they may join out of some sort of patriotic or sort of desire to serve a nation that's worthy of protecting, that's worthy of existing in this world. And then when they're there, they end up really starting to serve their brothers and sisters in the units that they're in. The nation may have drawn them in, the patriotic duty may have drawn the majority of them in, but what they really then end up serving is each other. And this is where you start hearing about these things like the formation of tribe, of real sisterhood forming. And then that becomes even more powerful than the patriotic sense that drew them in the first place.
And what is it that, once you're together with your colleagues, what is it that creates that bond that draws you together in a way that, obviously I didn't serve in the military. It seems like there's a very unique bond that you folks have that is different than the bond that other people have in some cases, high pressure situations. What's that about?
Well, God, it's one of those things. It's very, it's difficult to describe, yet I'll do my best. Okay. When people are forced to struggle together towards something bigger than themselves, when the very foundation of trust is what they live or die on, right? In other words, you have to trust the man or the woman to your left and to your right in order to do the thing that you have to do. That creates relationships and bonds that are so deep, so meaningful that you start to call them either brotherhood or sisterhood. It's often both right now in our mixed units. That force is incredibly compelling. It actually can be stronger than sort of the traditional family relationships. You're born into your family, and in most same, it's very similar in that you also are sort of born into your military family. You don't get to pick either. Yet the duress that you get to that you operate under the military creates this sense of belonging, this sense of purpose, this sense of, again, trust that candidly it becomes addicting.
Yeah, and is it as simple as my life depends on you and vice versa, or is there more to it? I mean, how should share, if you could, why that bond gets so powerful and sometimes is more powerful than even a family that you're born into kind of a bond?
Well, I think there's a big aspect of what you just said. I mean, there's this utter reliance on one another. I think there's more to it as well, though. I think there's a shared value, there's a community, there is accountability, right? I have to be good at my job. You have to be good at your job. And then together we form a real a team that we inherently know the only way we're going to be successful is if we're all good at our jobs simultaneously. And again, this then creates this layer of trust, which, candidly, I see very little of it outside of, those environments. It's a little bit different in the private sector than it is in the military. And so with that said, I think it's more than just the adversity. It's how the military members come together to form the groups to do whatever it is they're going to do, right? And how they have to trust one another so implicitly, so explicitly in order to get done, even the things that are even maybe not adverse. You can have a supply unit that there's very little risk in I'm making up the scenario where perhaps there's very little risk in a we're training in the United States, the supply unit's got to move some assets from point A to point B. If there's a lot of pressure, it can't be done alone. It has to be done as a unit, as a group. And it's that sense of mutual purpose, that self-reliance combined with the necessary team environment is what creates this feeling, this brotherhood, this sisterhood. That's a long answer. I'm sorry. I couldn't.
No, don't apologize at all. That's fucking awesome. It's fascinating. And the thing I find probably most fascinating about what you said is you made a small comment, Christian, about how it's different in the private sector. And so you've had, legendary success in the military, and now an incredible career so far in business. And we certainly want to talk about Project Relo because you and I are both very passionate about it. I love everything you've shared with me about it. It's such a fucking cool idea. But how have you, as you transition from being a Marine and having that camaraderie and that discipline and chain of command and all of the things that you enjoyed in the military and clearly embraced and embodied so much, maybe share a little bit with me about how you adjust to the corporate world and now being a chief information officer.
Yeah, so that adjustment's actually kind of a hard thing, right? So you get out of your typical military unit, in my case, the Marine Corps, and you're used to these environments where, the guy or the gal to your left and your right actually has got your best interests in mind versus trying to, torpedo you. And then you get out and there's an entirely different culture. There's a total different measure of selflessness. There's a different measure, candidly, there's a different measure of success, right? As opposed to the success being what the group does together, it's all about, me, I versus, we and us. And I can tell you from my perspective, I got out of the Marine Corps, and by the way, I was so excited. When I got out as a commo, a captain, but in communications. I had gone through a career change after the drawdown.
But what does a commo mean?
I was a communication officer. Thank you.
Okay.
By the way,
I don't know the cool military Jason Bourne lingo.
I wish it was more Jason Bourne. It was I was a communication officer. So we had to set up a battlefield of communications because in the Marine Corps it's all about shoot, move, communicate. That's how you win. You shoot, move, and communicate. But anyway, I got out.
Shoot, move, and communicate.
That's right. Shoot, move, and communicate. That's how you win. And actually, it's funny, but that's how you win in the private sector, actually.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. As I think I shared with you earlier, I'm a committed martial artist, and it's interesting. The movement matters a lot. There's two things in martial arts, right? There's hitting and getting hit, and the not getting hit part's really important. And if you throw a strike and just stand there, you're probably going to get hit back. Is that what's going on? Shoot and move.
That is precisely right. And if you were doing martial arts where there were two of you on one side versus two on the other side, that's when the communicate becomes so critical.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you find that is different in the private sector and the corporate world?
Well, speaking, generically, because the company I work for now is a fantastic company, and certainly suffers some of these issues much less than what I'm going to speak about generally. Uh, it, again, the how we reward people, how we incent people, how we actually even lead people in corporate America, sometimes it's just less than I'd like to see. I mean, let me ask you a question. What is the fundamental role of a leader? What are they supposed to do? It occurs to me that there's probably maybe 2 or 3 things if you really boil it down. Create a compelling vision. Where do you want to go?
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
Inspire people to want to go there. Don't tell them to go there. Inspire them to want to go there, right? And then be a servant that helps them get where they need to go in pursuit of the vision. That seems more or less like the 3 things that leaders need to do. I see very little compelling vision. There are some great examples. For example, some really great examples.
I'm so stoked that that you're reading Play Bigger. Thank you.
Oh, wait, hold on. I didn't want to pander, okay, but I did. I'll send it to you anyway. I bought a stack of these things about 4 feet high, and I'm making a mandatory reading for my staff.
Oh my, wow. I'm so touched, Christian. And when you get to a place with your team where you feel like they're far enough along with with Play Bigger, the book, I'm happy to jump on a call and do some Q&A or do whatever you want me to do with them. That's awesome.
Oh, we're so going to do that.
That's great. Absolutely. Of course.
That's awesome. God, I got sidetracked.
Where the fuck were we? We're certainly talking about the corporate world and a lack of vision in some cases, and how that can contribute to things not going as well as they might in the military. It's interesting. I just spent a few days with an incredible young entrepreneur named John Berghoff, and he runs an organization called the Flourishing Leadership Institute. And one of the conversations we had is, he goes into organizations and tries to help them really improve their ability to execute and build their company at the human level. And one of the things that we talked about is, can a company act as one? There's a lot of discussion about team and blah, 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 and the word team gets used so much that people almost go unconscious when you say the word, oh, here comes all the bullshit. There's no I in team, blah, 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 shit, right? But if you take a step back, it's really when a situation occurs that requires action, can we, whatever the team is, in this case, a corporation, act as one to produce a specific outcome? And of course, in business, we just don't see that very often. We don't have alignment of interests. We don't have clear vision. We don't have clear goals and objectives. And to your point about your sister or your brother next to you in the military, in the corporate world, often we don't have a fucking clue what our sister or brother next to us in the next office or the next cube or wherever, what they're up to and whether or not we're aligned on things. Yeah. How do you deal with that? When that is so present in your life as a captain in the Marines, and then you go into the corporate world and it's not present?
Yeah, that's like I think I was trying to get to an answer to that a ways back, and then I got sidetracked.
We can go on many magical mystery tours on Legends of Losers, where this is not.
That's good. That's good, because I seem to be having a hard time holding a train of thought here.
No, you're doing awesome.
Look, the thing is, I can tell you this: I had a really hard time adjusting, and now it's been 19 years since I got out of the Marine Corps, right? And first of all, once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine. I still identify myself as a Marine. I always will. And the other thing that I would say about that,
you still look like you could kick my ass and pretty much everybody else's ass.
That's when you get the lifestyle, it often stays with you, right?
Yeah.
Look, I'll be very candid. I've spent the last 19 years of my life trying to recreate that same sense of brother and sisterhood that I had in the Marine Corps in the corporate sector.
Yeah.
Uh, and I've had measures of success. You'll never get it that far, but if you could get it halfway there, if you can do what you said, which is inspire people to get in such a way that you can get them to act as one company, man, that's when things happen. That's when some of the stuff that you write about happens. The reason why the stuff that you profile in your book happens is partly because of the idea. It's got a lot to do with a lot of people believing in the idea.
Yes, big time.
They're inspired to help execute it.
Yes. My dear friend, Mike Maples, who's the co-founder of a great venture firm here in Silicon Valley called Floodgate, says that legendary entrepreneurs create movements.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. And so now you're 19 years into your business career, and you've had a pretty legendary fucking career outside of the military. Can you share a little bit about that part of your life?
Yeah, I feel like I've just been blessed. I mean, I went into the Marine Corps, like we said, there was a war looming in the Marine Corps. Even though I never went in country, the Marine Corps asked a lot, and yet I got more out of it than I gave, candidly, and then my good luck's continued because I've had. I've been lucky. I mean, I got out of the Marine Corps. I followed the traditional path that so many people do when they get out of the military. I joined a company, and two things happened. One, I'm like, oh my God, I made a mistake. I mean, these people, they don't really care about one another. And my God, it must be me. And I actually was filled with self-doubt, and I'm like, I made a mistake, right? What's going on here? And then I had gone into a consulting firm. And the other thing that happened that proved that I made a mistake was I saw what they were paying me, which I felt rich, man. I was making $60,000 a year. I was rich compared to what I was in service. And then I'm like, holy cow, they're billing me out at $170 an hour. Then I started my own company. I'm like, no, that's not going to work. So I started a company, grew that up actually very nice. I mean, it was making a good amount of money. And yet, from a scale perspective, I wanted to get back into large organizations. And so I put the company to the side. I put it under some really great leadership to continue to run it. It still exists today, although it is sadly closing this year as I move into other ventures. And I joined advertising because I was in love with advertising. I mean, I just thought it was the best thing ever.
Yeah, so tell me about that. As a former CMO myself, I love advertising, and most people fast forward through the ads and on TV, and I do too, of course. But when there's something that catches my eye, of course, I'm a student of it. And I read David Ogilvy's Ogilvy on Advertising early in my career. What a great book, isn't it?
Yep,
and it was a life changer for me. It really was. I have David Ogilvy in part to thank for my career and my life. So what was it that drew you? What was it that fascinated you with advertising?
Well, I can only answer that now in retrospect. I wasn't really sure, but I think what drew me to it is that I had these series of experiences, and I was still looking for this thing that was now absent from my life. Again, this sense of connectedness. And remember, a great leader's job is to really, again, compelling vision and inspire people. That means you actually have to emotionally connect and touch them. Yeah. And advertising seemed like, well, this is the discipline, this is the industry that should know more about how to do that than anybody. And because, I mean, when do you actually create the most successful campaigns? When do you really help, draw attention to a product or an activity or whatever it is, other than, is it just informational, or is it inspiring people to feel something about that thing?
It's interesting. I met a Stanford professor a few years ago named Jennifer. I think she pronounces it Acker. It's either Acker or Aker. Please excuse me. And she's written a bunch of books. And the reason I wanted to meet her, she was sort of a friend of a friend, but I was fascinated because she's a professor of marketing and happiness. She studies and teaches the sort of the more data orientation of, okay, what does the real research, not the happy horse shit about, the 7 things you should do, but like, real fact-based scientific approach to what makes people happy. And she's also a marketing professor. And I said to her, okay, so you got pretty much my two favorite topics. And at the time I was working on what I called my black belt in happiness. So I really just wanted to learn from her. But when I said to her, I said, okay, so what is it, these two things? Explain this to me. What she said was, well, how could you be successful as a marketer when you're marketing to people if you don't understand what makes them happy? And I thought, what a simple and profound idea. Yeah. Is that what you're talking about?
I think it is. Again, in retrospect, I don't think I knew what was drawing me to it. But I really like the idea of being able to work for a firm that was trying to emotionally connect with other, with large swaths of populations. And I ended up joining this very large advertising company that became a much larger advertising company that became a much, much larger. So it's now the third largest in the world, but the business. It was one of acquisition and after acquisition. And I was lucky. We got purchased. I joined as an officer of the company. I got.
So you joined in a senior role?
Yeah, I joined in a senior role. Yeah. Well,
and what was it about your background that sort of enabled you to come in at a senior role?
Well, I that's interesting. So basically, I was consulting through my own company to this firm, right?
Yeah.
And they actually had a big problem, and they could not fix the problem. And the issue was fundamentally they couldn't get the people oriented around fixing the problem. So they're like, hey, bring this consultant in. Pretty soon, as a consultant, I was actually in charge of a large swath of these employees. And then they said, wow, you really got them motivated. You got them working in as one, and the problem's fixed. Wow, we could use that a little bit more. And so they hired me as a vice president initially. I ended up leaving as an executive vice president.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? When you come in like that as a consultant or as an advisor, you get, in some cases, if you're good, you can find yourself in a position where you're actually making a really big impact on the company. And in some ways, I think coming in that way can be, not always, of course, but can be a better way to come in, right? Because you come in as a quote unquote outsider, but you share your ideas. And the thing I love about that, if you do any of the reading about power in business, and I assume it's the same in military, there's this thing called positional power. So when you're a captain, that comes with a set of powers, so to speak. And if you're a vice president or executive vice president or whatever it is, the interesting thing, of course, being about a consultant is you have zero positional power. So the only quote unquote power you can have is the power of your ideas. And to your point earlier on communication, Christian, your ability to interact and communicate with people. Right. So I'm curious, before you even joined, what was it about you that had this client resonate with you so much that, in spite of the fact that you had zero positional power, you were leading and you had all these people essentially under you? What was it about that had them want you to come on full time?
Well, it goes back to the Marine Corps, right? So this is the part that I got so much out of my service. Look, the Marine Corps in particular, maybe, all the branches, I'm sure, but the Marine Corps I know. The Marine Corps makes leaders. I remember standing in line at the chow hall through boot camp, 3 months of boot camp, and we had to stare at all the qualities that you had to embody in order to be a leader. And they were simple things. There's this simple concept of officers eat last in the Marine Corps, and don't you dare eat in front of your staff. Don't ever get in line before them, because every other officer will kick your ass for doing that.
Wow.
And the point of that simple illustration is that you have to put the group first. It's really hard. I mean, think about it. Let's talk about corporate America in general. You can get people highly motivated towards a big purpose and a grand vision. It's really god dang hard for me to get motivated to make some CEO $60 million a year, right? If you put people and you make it so that there's a goal that they are interested in obtaining, even as mundane as some of the stuff I was initially doing, right? You make them understand that they're part of the equation, and you don't put yourself over them, but you make it clear that you serve with them in the pursuit of this thing. Then people get motivated and they do things. You don't tell them what to do. You inspire them to act on their own.
So isn't it interesting in the corporate world? Like I notice at companies today, they still have preferential parking. Some companies still have preferential parking for their CEO, and certain executives are like right next to the door. And, all of those, there's some very visible perks that get given to the senior executive team. That stuff sounds kind of 180 difference from this philosophy that you're describing here from the Marine Corps.
Yeah, it's very interesting. When you go into the Marine Corps, you might go in as an officer, and then, I was a platoon commander from the time I entered. I had 45 Marines that reported to me directly, and under still pretty significantly adverse circumstances. Some of them my platoon sergeant was a gunny. So I'm 23 years old at this time. My gunny's probably 38 or 40. Who's telling who what to do?
Right. Right.
Let's be candid. I could have been a complete moron, second lieutenant. Here's the second lieutenant salute, and the shrug. for the audio folks.
Shrugging.
Yeah, you could have been a complete moron and said, "Hey, I hold positional power. Do what I say," but that would have led you down a really, really dangerous road. You have to listen first, right? I
hate to interrupt you, but maybe say, well, what's the dangerous road of sort of the dictator, positional power, do what I say? Why is that dangerous?
Well, especially in the lands of hyperscale and crowds, how could one person know the answer to everything, right? Or a staff of 10 is more likely to know, the answer collectively. Your job is to put the answer together from what they know, not what you know.
And you were smart enough at 23 to get that?
Yeah, the Marine Corps made sure I was smart enough at 23.
Did the Marines teach you to be smart?
Well, they taught me these traits, these attributes. They told me and trained me in some very basic behaviors. One of the best ones is, for example, lead by example. Never ask anybody to do anything you wouldn't do yourself. Never be put yourself above your staff. Always look out for their welfare. There's, offline, I'll share with you the Marine Corps leadership traits and characteristics. And if you lead by those things, you can be successful in the Marine Corps. You can be successful in the corporate world as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what did you learn in your time in advertising? I'm curious, as a marketing guy, and of course, as a chief information officer, you're sitting there at literally the nexus of marketing and technology. And as I'm sure you're probably aware, a few years back, Gartner Group came out and said the chief marketing officer is going to have a bigger tech budget than the CIO by, I think they said 2020, which only served to have every enterprise sales rep start banging on CMO's doors. Luckily, I got out in time before that happened. But there is this amazing intersection that we live in today of marketing and technology, and you lived at that intersection at one of the companies driving that intersection. So would you mind sharing some of the things that you learned about that?
Well, I learned a lot of things when I was in marketing. I learned good things and I learned bad things. I learned how powerful, these messages can be that we put in front of people, and how they shift and shape what people think and feel, and often about themselves. And I learned that sometimes the messaging actually makes people feel bad about themselves in order to move a product. And I learned that, and that candidly was one of the reasons why I left the business. I certainly learned. Go ahead.
Say a little bit more about that, about why that motivated you to leave.
Well, I got a personal story on that one. You want to hear that?
Yeah, I do.
So this was, that must have been, let's see, my daughter's 20, so about 10 years ago, right? Yeah, it was 10 years ago. I remember distinctly, my daughter is 10 years old. She comes up to me, I'm laying on my couch. I can see this in my mind as I can see you on the screen right now.
Mm-hmm.
She comes up to me, and she's a typical 10-year-old, sort of rail thin, pretty girl, hair in the ponytails. And she goes,
"What's her name, Christian?"
Emma.
Emma,
yeah. And she comes up to me and she goes, "Dad, I think I'm fat." And I'm like, "What the heck are you talking about?" She goes, "Dad, I think I'm fat." Well, I started pulling and trying to tease out what she was talking about. And she had seen just a number of advertisements until one just made that trigger in her head. and she came to tell me that she thought she was fat. And what I found out at the time, working for the company I did, that either was responsible for 1 in every 3 ads or 1 in 3. They either did 1 in every 3 ads or did the media for those ads, that it was one of ours. And I just
it was
thought,
one of your ads that you guys created and then distributed and do all the things that big advertising agencies do, that was responsible for Emma feeling bad at 10 years old for that she thought she was fat.
well, there's probably a lot of factors. There was
Sure. But this one was the one she identified.
Yeah. And then that's when I went in and I resigned, like within 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, and what was it? I mean, maybe the answer is obvious, but going in and resigning is a big thing for most people. You know, what was it about that motivated you to say, I'm going to quit my job over this?
Well, I'm a very purpose-driven person, and I also actually have I don't fear a lot of the same things people fear. I just see opportunity wherever I look. I mean, there's so many opportunities to create great businesses, help great firms, right? Make great outcomes. And if that one had just run its course, and that's what it felt like to me, it's run its course, it's time for me to move on. What's the next thing? In reality, I resigned. They paid me to stay on for some period of time, which made it really easy for me to then transition to whatever else I was going to transition. And it worked out great. And you know what? Even if I didn't know that it was going to work out great, I still was going to resign. And but these things, this is how life works, right? I live by the saying, what you focus on expands. And if you focus on opportunity and good things, it's very strange how you find opportunity and good things.
Isn't that funny how that works? The other thing I'm curious about, one of the things many things I love about you is you come out of the military, out of the Marines, and you end up shortly thereafter becoming an entrepreneur, starting your own consulting company when you realize, hey, wait a minute, I'm making this and they're selling me for that. Holy shit, right? So maybe share a little bit about your entrepreneurial motivation and spark.
Well, thank you.
No, it's really cool. I mean, fuck, you've lived many different lives and confronted, challenges and opportunities that, some other people don't step up and deal with. I mean, it's an extraordinary set of things that you've designed your life around achieving. It's fucking inspiring. So yeah, I'm curious, as an entrepreneur, and there's lots of entrepreneurs who subscribe to Legends and Losers. Tell us what motivated you to be an entrepreneur, shortly after being in the military.
Well, so one thing, is I'll go back to the Marine Corps and point out something that a lot of people think of our veterans as being like, it's all command and control. You don't do anything until the higher ranked person tells you what to do. And candidly, that's just completely incorrect. The military can only be successful if they help teach its men and women self-reliance and independent action. So taking that forward then, right, I saw this and there was just this inequity, right? I thought I was making all this money. I was happy as could be. And then I saw, well, hold on, wait a second.
Hey.
I'm a capitalist. I swear to God, I'm a capitalist and I want them to make some money. I want every company I do business with to make money. That's how things work better. There was a disproportionate amount of money going into the hands of the company that I was working for. And I just said, screw that. Right. And so
so funny
about it. Look, I didn't have any money. I didn't have any savings. I was only been out of the Marine Corps for 6 months.
Wow.
I was too stupid to know that I could fail at starting a company. I was just too dumb.
So it wasn't that failure wasn't an option. It didn't exist in the realm of possibility.
Yeah, as Mad Dog Mattis says, Marines don't know how to spell failure. I had no idea that there was.
That's great.
There was anything else out there, but hey, look, obviously companies are buying what I'm doing. So they see value in it. Okay, there's a market, a very clear line of sight to a market opportunity. And by the way, they definitely value what I'm doing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be paying specifically for my skill. So I'm like, well, there's got to be other ones out there. And so I started it. And having no business background besides my degree from the University of Michigan in economics, which didn't prepare me, by the way, for anything. Great school, but the degree didn't mean anything. And
Yeah, but you learned all about Adam Smith and that good shit, didn't you?
yeah, actually I did. Yeah, I actually did. Yeah. In the end, we grew this thing. See, that's a military thing. A lot of we's and us's. So we grew this thing to, within a year, it was well into over $1 million of revenue.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Out of the blue with no business experience, really, six months in.
Yeah, 6 months in. And again, too stupid to know that, what I was supposed to be doing. Like little things like, someone would say, hey, you probably should have insurance.
Okay, oh, shit. I didn't know businesses had insurance.
Oh, yeah. There's a company that sells that. Hartford. Oh, great. Okay. Let's call them.
That's awesome. And do you think, one of the things I want to talk to you about is Relo. And so would you describe that today as your entrepreneurial passion, even though it's a charity? It feels like what you're doing is very breakthrough, very much designing a new category. Is that where you're, if you will, scratching your entrepreneurial itch today?
Yeah, actually, everything I do scratches an entrepreneurial risk. So within the company that I'm a part of, which is, real quick plug, and I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. Underwriters Laboratories, its focus and its purpose is safer living and working environments. It's all about safety, security, and sustainability.
You guys are the guys that we all know because we see your seal on a lot of the products that we buy. Yes.
Only $26 billion a year.
Yeah, but other than that, it's not material. So, can you share with us what Underwriters does?
Well, so Underwriters Laboratories has a history of protecting societies and individuals by testing products and ensuring that they are safe and compliant with the regulations that allow them to be sold in the United States and other markets. It's increasingly moving into the world of big data and digital solutions that are solving those same problems, but doing it at a scale across the globe and doing it much bigger.
Can we get your seal of approval on a security software product to keep bad guys out? Is that where we're heading?
Well, now that if I told you, I might have to kill you for that. There is a need for that kind of thing.
And I know you have all the skills, and I would put your skills up against my skills any day.
Yeah, no, we're doing some really interesting things, and that's an example of scratching that entrepreneurial, in this case, intrapreneurial.
Yeah. So you feel like you're doing entrepreneurial things at Underwriters because you're moving far away from just putting a stamp of approval on consumer electronics and the like.
Yeah, that's right. And isn't that kind of interesting to know you can do that in a 120-year-old firm? Think about it.
Isn't that incredible? And it was either late November or early December, Christian, I was lucky enough to be invited to speak to this innovation summit. That's a consortium of Fortune 500 companies who get together regularly and talk about entrepreneurship and innovation and how they can bring new products and services to the market. And there was a guy there who is one of the top guys in the innovation group of one of the largest energy companies in the world. Completely inappropriate to share who, but as we got to talking, we sort of took a break midway through the day. It was more of a workshop kind of a session I was doing, and we got to chatting at the break. And he said to me, and this is an incredible company with a giant market cap, with more resources. Just incredible. He says, you know what? I think category design might be our number one problem. And I said, why? And he began to tell me about opportunities they were seeing in the Internet of Things. Yeah. And he said, but we have no proven ability to capitalize on new opportunities, to position ourselves in new categories, even when we work on new advanced technologies in those categories. And he said, we might miss this whole fucking thing. And so how is it that you guys, more than 100 years old, are innovating far beyond even what your charter was a decade ago?
Well, you got to read your own book. Your book says when you get the CEO behind things, you can create new categories.
And is that what's going on at Underwriters?
Yeah, we have leadership that wants to make this company last another 120 years. And to make it last another 120 years, you're going to have to reinvent yourself. And category design specifically in this case is about being different and better,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
we can be different and better and solve these big problems of, again, safety, sustainability, especially around emerging technologies. And we believe we can do that at scale. And it's time for us to do that. And it's time for us to think about doing it differently than we've done it in the past.
And as a CIO, how do you think about your role, your function inside the organization, Christian, in making that happen?
Yeah, so I've gone by the title CIO for a long time. Technically my title is I'm the Chief Digital Officer. So that's important actually, because IT is this thing that's normally like the engine room, the engineering room. You know, it's the big systems, it's the Oracle and the SAPs, it's all that big stuff in the rooms with the blinking lights and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's where Scotty works, right?
Yeah, exactly. Need more power. And our company has become what we believe the largest software company in our industry. And so how do you bring all these different software capabilities and IT and a digitizing workforce and society all together to create a different kind of workforce, a different set of outcomes? And so my job is a little bigger than IT. It's
so you have the internal piece and the external piece. So to put it sort of simply, would that be a simple way to think about it?
Yeah, that's going in the right direction. Yeah, for sure.
So on the product side, on the sort of on the product side, tell us a little bit about your role there in helping to deliver digital products to the market for underwriters.
Well, believe it or not, what you're not getting in this
Are you holding back on me here, Christian?
No. Normally, I'm actually really good at asking questions, but you got me. You got me with so many good questions that I've been unable to ask any of my own. So, you know what I do more than anything? I do discovery. I started asking our customers and different portions of our customers. In other words, our customers are huge, and they're a full spectrum of people, right? That do a lot of different things. I started really kind of pulling the thread and finding out what are their real biggest problems. You know, when you hear a very, very senior executive for one of the biggest, most valuable companies anywhere in the world say, our biggest problem is our inability to grow as fast as we want because of our inability to scale, and that company is a technology company, you start finding it.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So those are the kind of problems we want.
So you think asking customers what problems they have and then going back to the ranch and figuring out how we might solve them. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, that's a way to do it. Although it's nuanced, because you can ask them what problems they have, but you have to keep pulling that thread until you get to the root of it, because we're all instinctively, whether we realize it or not, we're on these railroad tracks, all of us, and we're on the tracks until someone just bumps us enough and we go, oh yeah, actually the real issue is this. You got to bump them a little bit. We got to bump ourselves, right, all the time in order to.
I heard early in my career, Christian, that you should ask on any important question, you should ask why 7 times.
Yeah.
To unpeel the onion.
That's right. That's a good point.
Yeah, to find out really what's driving this thing, right? It's certainly not the first 2 answers.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So hey, could we switch gears a little bit and let's talk about what you're doing for bringing veterans and corporations together. It's just such an incredible, exciting. Really, I mean, I don't want you to be overly embarrassed, but it's a really visionary thing that you're doing here. And when you first shared it with me a few weeks back, I was just knocked over. So, let's talk a little bit about Relo and what you're up to and some of the people involved. And most importantly, I want to know when I could come on a mission. But tell us all about it.
So we're talking about Project Relo. We call it Relo, as you've been calling it. But Project Relo, it's a real different way. Of course, road less traveled. It's a real different way of thinking about solving a problem that we have. The problem that we have is fundamentally, say it. So like, let's just see if this sounds familiar. Like a 5-year-old could understand it. The problem we have is that we subconsciously have a sort of negative opinion about our veterans, right? When you ask people, what do you think about their veterans? They'll say two things. I've done this so many times. They'll say, hey, they'll express some measure of gratitude that we appreciate their service, et cetera. And then the next thing will be, oh, and that they might need some help, right? And so fundamentally what we're doing is we're trying to think about just completely changing that dialogue around not veterans needing help, not needing a handout, but that there's actually an advantage to hiring veterans. Now, how we do that is what's really unorthodox. It's really, really different. Essentially, what we do is we take top corporate leaders and we take superlative examples of transitioning veteran leadership and capability and character. And we conduct, in partnership with the United States Army, pseudo-military operations over a period of 4 days. And what the participant gets, the participant in this case being the corporate leader, they get the absolute best leadership training that they can get, period, bar none. End of story, right? I'm a graduate of Yale's Executive Leadership Program. Fantastic program. I love Yale. Fantastic. This is better leadership training, period. Because you can't learn it on a whiteboard. You have to see it. And our transitioning veterans teach leadership to the exact same people that they actually want to get hired by, into their organizations when everything is said and done. And so what ends up happening is that the participants get this great leadership. The top leaders in these corporate environments, they get this desire to want to have more of these men and women in their organizations, and it creates a sincere, earnest pull.
Because as you shared with me in the past, the executives get a no bullshit, full on guttural experience of what it's like to be in the military, even in a very controlled, of course, way, I'm sure, and that increases their appreciation for veterans. Is that what ultimately happens?
Yeah, I mean, let's go back to the beginning of the conversation. You said, Christian, what were some of the things that you got out of the Marine Corps, and what did you find that we talked about this brother and sisterhood? In 4 days, we create a brother and sisterhood. And we do it because of the very visceral curriculum we run them through. It's very physical, accessible, meaning anybody can do it. Men, women, we've had people in their 70s, executives in their 70s do it.
So I don't have to be an Olympic athlete to come do one of the missions.
No, you just have to be willing and earnest and of good character, because we actually have a screening process. We have a no asshole rule.
Oh shit! I might get screened out.
I think you're all right. I'll vouch for it.
Thank you.
But it's very visceral. I mean, from the executives get this leadership training in a context they think they know the veterans. In other words, we'll put them behind real 50 cal machine guns, saws, M4s, M16s, right? They'll see us call for fire, right? Airstrike will come in.
Artillery. Are you guys firing live rounds?
No, we're not crazy.
Okay. We just checking. I'm like, oh, fuck.
No. We allow the participants to use real weapons, firing simulated rounds in confidential electronic or digital scenarios, right?
Yep.
Same equipment our men and women train on, except for they're not live rounds, and because we do have to be safe. I mean, heck, I work for a safety company. That's
we can't have corporate executives. You were talking earlier about the disconnects in the corporate world, and people are not always on the same page, and sometimes people are up to things. This could turn into something terrible where, hey, I just went to this military leadership training and accidentally shot my asshole boss. We could have this sort of Dick Cheney scenarios happening all the time.
There's no fragging on any of these trips, okay? No block parties. But they get this very visceral experience of what they know about vets, and still learn then how veterans are trained that the success only happens when it's a group success. The second part of the curriculum, and by the way, this is a very structured, very deliberate curriculum. The second part of the curriculum then educates the participants on what it actually takes to put these rounds downrange. In other words, all of the planning, all the logistics, all the communications, everything, and the intelligence, the various services, and then they go, holy cow, these men and women actually have such a broad base of relevant skills. And we only thought of men and women as like, blowing things, shooting things, blowing shit up and whatnot. And there's so much more to them. And they learn firsthand about their selflessness, the quality of their character, the fact that they're not command and control and automatons. They are really prone to independent action. They're self-reliant, but they're very supportive. And they go, I want more of these men and women in our organization. Our motto is hiring a vet is not a social good. It is good business. It's part of our dialogue.
Yeah. And you and I talked about, the veteran advantage, and the interesting thing, and it's been echoing in my head ever since we spoke about it. And I'd love for you to shine a little bit of a light on it. The downside of sort of the awareness and, if you will, acceptance of PTSD, which you tell me, but is a generally good thing. People now have an awareness of a condition that affects veterans and some others too. But you brought up a very fascinating downside to awareness about veteran PTSD.
Yeah. So I'm unsure if I told you this particular story. I'll tell it now for for your audience here. True story. Experienced it firsthand. Myself and our executive director, who is a bona fide war hero. We were in a 35th floor boardroom, Chicago, overlooking the beautiful skyline, in an office with the CEO and the direct staff, and they were saying, "Yeah, we're really interested in what you're doing with Project Reload. We want to hire more vets." And then the CEO looked at myself and my executive director and says, "Just make sure you screen out the ones with PTSD, though." Now, there's about 5 things wrong with that statement. 5 things wrong. And, my initial reaction was a blood boil. I mean, I could feel my forehead turning red. And yet our job is really to help people understand that there's more to veterans than PTSD. The point of this is that the topic of PTSD was originally a very good thing in the sense that it was raising awareness about a real issue. The bad thing is that it's now almost smeared across the whole veteran population and making it seem in the minds of so many that veterans are loose cannons. And it's just so far from the truth. It's just, and by the way, and the vets that have PTSD, you know what? You can get PTSD and not be a vet. In fact, several studies think that the distribution of PTSD is the same between civilians and military members and veterans.
Well, we're all colored by our own personal experience, of course. And I have one of my best friends in the world served in the military, and he has PTSD. And he shared that with me shortly after we met. And his road back has been a challenging road. He only got his driver's license recently because he was in a Jeep that got blown up, and everybody in the Jeep died except for him. And of course, those were men that he was serving with, and so forth and so on. And so I've seen it firsthand. But the thing that was fascinating to me about my friend's PTSD, and frankly still is he's incredibly highly functional, Christian. I had this picture of sort of PTSD where, well, fuck, if you had PTSD, they tied you down in some kind of a chair and pumped you full of drugs and just tried to make you calm down or something. I don't know. But the interesting thing that I've noticed is, at least with this one situation, he's an incredibly successful, incredibly affable, loving, highly productive, incredibly focused, purpose-driven, like very few other people. And sometimes shit freaks him out, and over time, he's learned to deal with it more and more and more. But I guess my point is that here's someone with PTSD that there's no way you could say isn't leading a great life, and from a business and a work perspective is as highly productive and as effective as almost anybody you could run into. And yet, he's got PTSD and it flares up, and he deals with it like a responsible adult who's committed to moving forward in his life. And that's it. Is that just my experience, or could you even help us understand, how veterans deal with PTSD, particularly when they come into the corporate world?
It's it's interesting, your example. I'm unsurprised, utterly unsurprised that you've had an experience with a veteran that had a traumatic experience and has resulted in long-term post-traumatic stress, and that they're highly functional, right? And let me, before I answer your question, let me ask you a question. How many people do you know that never served in the military who has some sort of baggage, that had some sort of thing happen in their life and are maybe less functional?
I mean, many, and for reason, not that the reason matters, because if you have, something that's a mental issue that's causing you to not have the life that you want, it's serious no matter what. That said, you look at it and go, your life's a mess because your parents got divorced. Really? Like, fucking get over it and be an adult. Right. And so you see people, I'm sure you have them in your life, and we all do, who are highly dysfunctional, and they blame it on something that to many, well-adjusted, successful people, you kind of go, really? You're holding on to that thing? Right. And so I get your point. There are many, many people who are not functional for some reason that might feel like a PTSD-like thing, who never served in the military and never had anything at that level of, I'll use this word, that horror happened to them. I mean, what happened to my friend was a fucking horror show.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet he deals with it. He's productive. He's successful.
He's happy. He's married. He's an incredible father. He has an incredible life. And every once in a while, this thing gets him. And, for a while, it stopped him on certain dimensions of his life. But he just said, I'm not going to let this stop me. And, he takes responsibility for it. And he goes forward. And he's an amazing dad and an incredible friend. And he's living a legendary life.
I think that, as opposed to focusing on the PTSD, what you're really focusing on, and I think rightly so, is his determination to lead a legendary life.
Yes, yes.
I think that is more the norm. I think that is the norm.
So, you and I talked when we first talked about this notion of a veteran's advantage, that the paradigm you're hoping to share with the world is that veterans are like you, and that companies that embrace veterans actually have a talent pool in a market today where, finding and keeping top talent gets tougher and tougher almost every day. So, Christian, you touched on it somewhat, but I'd love for you to underscore, what are the things that you think veterans bring to the corporate world as employees and leaders that are unique and that are powerful, that people need to really understand?
Well, that's a great question, and thank you. I would say this. Let me start off by saying I don't think that veterans are better than non-veterans. I don't. I love people, and I love all spectrums of people, and I love the spectrum of veterans. And you have, like any group of people, you have a full spectrum of them, right? There's a couple things about veterans that are really, really awesome and exceptional, though. First of all, the United States military is the most diverse workforce in the United States, period.
Wow.
The other thing is, these men and women, when they go into the military, they are so meticulously trained in so many relevant areas. And so what you get when you get a veteran, the typical veteran, and then of course there's all the exceptional ones, is you get someone who's been continuously trained under sometimes very, very austere or adverse conditions. They have a tendency to want to promote the group over the individual. So there's an innate selflessness. They have a propensity for independent action, because that's the only way you survive in any of these sort of adverse circumstances. And in the end, there's a loyalty and a spree that they just want to be part of something bigger. If organizations could look at that talent pool, and like every segment of diversity, as opposed to saying, oh, that segment of people, they need a hand up, and reverse the thinking and say, my God, we as leaders need to take advantage of that and pull that in for everything good that it has to offer. They will build better companies doing that, period, end of story. And that's what I would convey to everybody.
Yeah, those skill sets sound like things that companies don't want. I mean, who wants a resilient, committed, selfless, well-trained, people who can execute like their lives depend on it, because it did. No, we don't want to hire them. And so if I happen to be listening and I say, hey, I'm an executive, I want to take my team through this leadership training, and maybe I'm interested in tapping into this incredible talent pool of amazing people who served our country so selflessly, what should they do?
All right, so that's a layup. Thank you. So you can
this is the fastball down the middle.
So it's projectreload.org, project, projectrelo.org. It's a nonprofit, registered 501c3. And you know what? I'll tell you, just email me personally if you're really interested in this. This is Christian@projectreload.org. Find me on LinkedIn too, Christian Anscheutz. One of a kind, I guess. So reach out to me personally if you want. We want to find top leaders that want to continue their personal and professional development, and that have a passion for bringing great talent into their organizations.
And we'll make sure, Christian, all that's also in the show notes, how to get a hold of you, the Project Reload website, and so forth. As we look to kind of wrap up our dialogue today, is there anything else you'd like to share?
You just you've asked so many good questions, and it's been such a good, free-flowing conversation. I would say, no, man, I think you covered it all. Normally, I have something to add at the end, but maybe it's just because you're such a good interviewer that you left me with nothing here. So,
well, flattery will get you everywhere. Well, Christian, you are absolutely a legendary guy. I mean, your career in business and where you sit at the intersection of business and technology, and now with security, it's such an incredible topic. And, leading such a storied company that's in the company you're with today, listen, it may sound overreaching to some, but it's an American treasure. I mean, there are not very many companies that live past 100, and you guys aren't living, you're flourishing, you're thriving, and you're pioneering new categories. And you as the chief digital officer, that's a great distinction to make. It's incredibly inspiring. And then, of course, your military background speaks for itself. So I just really want to thank you. I love what you're doing with Project Reload. I really look forward to horning my way into a mission, hopefully in the next few months. And I got to say to you, I love how you've embraced Play Bigger and the concepts of category design.
Absolutely. It was one of the things when we talked, I kind of intuitively knew that we were onto something when we were just saying we want to change the dialogue. But this concept of being very deliberate about it, being very purposeful in making it a category, I think is going to help propel us more easily forward, because we're going to be more succinct about it. We're going to really articulate the problem. This notion of fundamentally changing how people think about our vets is actually the problem. We just haven't yet admitted it yet.
Well, and I am fascinated at, if you will, category design at the social level. We used to call the people who live on the street winos and bums, and we call them homeless people now. And that changes the way we think, right? And people have heard me share this story before, but, my mom in Canada, when she got her first job, the law was that women got, a minimum wage was less for women than men. And the thinking at the time was men need to provide for a family and women don't. And so that happened. And those things change because some people stand up and they have what feels like at the time a provocative and engaging point of view. And to quote the Big Lebowski, "This aggression will not stand, man." And they teach the world how to think differently and open us up. And you are teaching the world to think differently, that veterans come out not needing a handout, not needing a greeter job at Walmart, but really with an incredible skill set, who are incredibly loyal and dedicated and incredibly highly trained. And that by looking at them the wrong way, companies are really missing out on an incredible talent pool. And if anybody in our society deserves to be considered deeply, it's our veterans.
Hear, hear.
So Christian, thank you so much for being on Legends and Losers. You're a legendary guy, and I can't wait to see you in person soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely fantastic talking.
Thank you. Be legendary, my friend.
As I know you will.
Wow. Well, there you have it. You could see why I'm having a bromance with Christian. What an extraordinary human being. All right. Well, we're going to wrap the show. I want to thank you so much for checking out Legends and Losers. If you appreciate the show, please show your appreciation and subscribe on iTunes and give us a legendary review. Also, to remind you, we're also on Stitcher and YouTube. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Legends and Losers, Twitter @LegendsLosers. And if you must send us an email, you can send one to blackHole@legendsandlosers.com. And we'd like to do a couple shout outs today. I want to thank my dear friend Matt Hansen at Tahoe Truckee Homes for a wonderful review on iTunes. Same goes for my dear friend and adopted brother Mike Block, Rick Hansen, Brian Rocha, Tom Schwab of Interview Valet. I want to say a big thank you for your video review of Play Bigger on Amazon. John Berghoff of FLI. John, we love you, and we appreciate all of your support. Holly Young for both your review of Play Bigger and Legends and Losers on iTunes. Jason Zapala, Bruce Lochhead, my dad, thanks Bruce. Derek Hansen, thanks for an awesome review on iTunes. Jenna Bain, Mark Whalen, Jane and Tristan Gonzalez, thank you both very much. Thank you for being regular listeners. And Chris Payne. All right. With that, we'd also like to thank HarperCollins, Play Bigger, How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Dominate Markets, Equity Directory, the invite-only network of entrepreneurs and startup talent exchanging work for equity. Our dear friends at onelifefullylived.org, Dream It, Plan It, Live It. Positive Marketing, PR, Marketing, Category Design in London, Europe, and beyond. Vixen 2, coaching you and your company to hack the future. 1-800-CEO-READ, business books. They're awesome. Why don't you read some? Project Reload, connecting legendary veterans and executives to create new opportunities around extraordinary leadership. Hal Alrod's Achieve Your Goals podcast, currently hosted by John Berghoff, one of the top podcasts in the world. All right. We'd like to remind you that all rights are disturbed. This podcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast networks. We must warn you that the producers of this oddcast may have been consuming libations. Don't be lame. Get out of the passing lane. Johnny Cash was right. Support your local category designer. Subscribe on Stitcher. Watch This Is Spinal Tap. And remember, this podcast really ties the room together. Our deepest apologies to Kim Kardashian. Sorry, Kimmy. We ran out of time for you. That's it. Thanks, friends, and be legendary.